Well, thank you for joining us for Everything Under the Sun, the AccuWeather Podcast. I'm your host, Regina Miller, and I'm joined in the studio by Andy Robb, my producer, as usual. Hi, Andy.
Hello. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, you too. And you know what? We're talking about the blizzard of 1996. Listen to this blast from the past.
January the 8th, it's 1996. The snow is still falling in the tri-state area this morning.
That's right, filling the record books today. You're looking at a live picture of New Rochelle as the snow covers everything as far as the eye can see. Blankets and blankets of it everywhere.
And that was a report from back in 1996 from WABC TV in New York. And Andy, you were a kid at the time.
Yeah.
You were off school for that for like a week because you were in the Philadelphia area. They got heavy snow. And we're going to be talking about that. And we've brought into the studio two meteorologists extraordinaire. We have Dave Dombek and Paul Pastelok. Dave Dombek, you were on the floor that day. You were forecasting, and Paul,
I was there too.
Were you?
I was there.
What? Okay, so I want to hear your stories because
Yeah.
I know that Dave was forecasting.
I don't remember a lot, but I was there. All I remember is just constantly just going to the radar, the radar, calling up the radar numbers, and that was my job. Just keep bringing them to everybody. You know, get the radar, get the radar, get the radar. So
Yeah, and it was back in the old days
old.
of forecasting because I was talking to you, Andy, a little bit before we got started because, and this is really interesting to me because I was not at AccuWeather back then, but you guys were. It was a much smaller operation, and it was before we really had the internet tools to like use to forecast this.
Right. I think the internet was just kind of getting started at that time. I mean, people were starting to use email and so forth, but it really, it was nowhere near what we have, even by like late 90s, early 2000s.
we were still wallpapering with maps, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Our wallpaper was all forecast maps.
Paper maps, analyzing
Walls.
paper, yes. And we had much less information as
Right.
far as technology, models. We had models then, obviously we did, but it was a lot less than what we have now, the guidance. But I do distinctly remember one of the things about that storm, and in fact we have, if you've ever been to the AccuWeather building here, we have what's called our Wall of Fame. All these
Right.
big events that we had great victories and we beat the competition in these storms. And this was one of them where the National Weather Service and other competitors, 3-4 days out, they had fair weather, partly cloudy, blah-de-da, nothing weather,
Yeah,
because of the fact that the one American model, at that time it was called the MRF, now it kind of morphed into what we call the GFS today, but it was the American model, and 3-4 days out, it had this wimpy little weak storm system moving off of the South Carolina coast out to sea harmlessly and nothing going on, whereas the European model, now, it was much more limited back in those days, the information we got from the Euro, but we did have access to some European information. That was forecasting the storm to be much stronger, much farther north, coming up the coast. And what it was saying was, and it was very consistent, run after run after run of that model, it kept saying the same thing, kept forecasting.
It's like I'm trying to tell you here.
Hello?
I'm trying to tell you guys.
Hello, we're
Something's
are you
happening
listening?
here.
And so it was very consistent. The consistency of the European, that was one thing, and what it was forecasting made sense. It's not like it was some like, where is this coming from? It's science fiction. This is like way out there. If you looked globally, and this is more Paul's forte, with looking at the whole global patterns and the teleconnections, what it was forecasting made perfect sense what was going on across the globe. And I don't know, Paul, you want to maybe set the table on some of that?
The whole thing, Dave, though, I was in a long-range forecaster then.
Oh,
But
right,
you look
because
back,
you
you look back all the time at
Again,
that stuff.
like I said in the beginning,
You were just running out, and so
I was a
tell
monitor.
me your job.
I was a monitor, where a monitor is generally in charge of, short-term severe weather events, utilities, things like that.
And getting storm reports,
so
those kinds of things?
We had an old ancient radar system back then. It wasn't like you call up the radar on your computer
Right.
and everything shows up right away. We had to go to this thing, what was it called, Cavoris?
Yeah, Cavoris, right, yes.
Cavoris. We
Yeah.
had to actually call somebody,
Another party, right.
another party, and say, can you give us a radar of this area of the country? And they would send a printout,
Oh
and it
my
would have
gosh,
a bunch
are
of
you
numbers.
serious?
It would have a bunch of numbers on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 being lighter precipitation, 5 being heavier. And that's all we had in that area. And sometimes it would take almost 5 minutes before we got that radar.
It's so unimaginable to me now with the way things go with forecasting now. Plus, I was even thinking that like now we even have tweets and we have video and we have immediate access to what's happening on the ground. We have, we have immediate. It's astonishing.
There was no
to
cell
me.
phones back then. No cell phones.
Well, I remember because I'm as old. I'm as old.
You're not
as
as
you
old
guys.
as me.
Well, I don't know. We're not going to say our ages out loud, but I'm thinking we're all somewhere around
I'm
the
the
same
old guy here.
vicinity. I was gonna say,
I think they
we're-
could figure it out.
Yeah,
96
yeah.
blizzard.
But I do remember when people used to say about surfing the net. I was like, what are they talking about with surfing the net? Because
Yeah.
it was still so new. Everything was so new. But,
Yep.
Heck, I was afraid. I was afraid to touch a computer or something.
right, to break something.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what this storm did. And then let's break down how it came about. But what did we end up with? What states were hit? What are we talking about in snowfall amounts? What were the results of the blizzard of 96, as you remember?
It was a mid-Atlantic storm. It was New Jersey, Philadelphia area was hardest hit. I mean, 31 inches. That's to this day, that's their biggest snowfall on record.
That's why you were off for a whole week, Andy.
Yeah, pretty much.
When you were in school.
But a lot of shoveling. So.
You made some money.
Yeah.
Made some bank.
Just wanted it out longer. They did it for Andy back then.
I will say this much: I did get to build like the best snow fort. I don't think I've ever topped it with that
really?
snowfall.
Do you
Yeah.
have any pictures of it? Because we could put that on.
We had a whole tunnel system and everything. It was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Washington, Baltimore, Wilmington, New York State, that was the core part of the storm. And actually, Pennsylvania, if you looked at that, it almost sliced
Yes.
the state in half.
Cut underneath, right?
It's southeastern.
Yeah.
The southeastern half of Pennsylvania got hammered. Here in central Pennsylvania, State College, it was a good storm. I mean, it was 17, 18 inches of snow. As close by as like Du Bois, they got like an inch or two.
Yes.
So
I
it was a
hate
sharp.
that. Oh,
it was
I
a
hate
very
that.
sharp cutoff. Scranton, Wilkes-Barre got hammered. They got like 20 inches of snow. Binghamton, New York got almost nothing. So it was one of those very sharp
Yes.
northwestern cutoffs. So the snow was a big thing. It was very cold. It was a dry, powdery snow, and there was a lot of wind with that snow.
There was a lot of cold in front of that.
a
system.
lot of cold,
A lot of
very
in
cold,
front.
very cold in front of it, and so you had that was the setup. You had the dry, cold air, Arctic air in place, and here comes this
what
storm.
did the surface map look like?
Big high to the north,
Big
probably
high.
up in northern New England or eastern Canada. Big high, Arctic high.
There was actually two highs, I think, in that. And if you look at the upper level structure, what you had going on is the blocking was not in your ideal Greenland block. We always look for the Greenland block for these mega, big, big
Big
huge
events.
storms.
Okay.
Well, we had kind of it's actually kind of similar to what we're expecting this year. The
Oh,
blocking
don't
came
tell me
over.
that.
The blocking came over from northern Europe and hit the eastern part of Greenland and stayed there. And then there was more blocking over central Canada, which helped force the system to go farther south initially.
Right.
But that block that came over into eastern Greenland kept the cold in check, and that's
Right.
what kind of kept the dry snow that we saw that blew around and everything. So it was kind of an odd setup of the blocking to have a huge system like this, but I think there was multiple factors that worked together, Dave, to get this system
But
to
there
work
was
out.
also enough. It wasn't too much blocking and too much cold air overwhelming everything, like the American model was showing and suppressing everything
Yes.
in this
That,
weak
so
little.
that
there
that
was
high
enough
was pushing it. It was keeping it.
That's where
keeping
the-
it held in check and keeping the cold air, but there was enough amplitude to the pattern and enough of that southern branch of the jet stream that was able to have enough amplitude and able to curve it up far enough north to bring the snows up into Philadelphia and New York City and Pennsylvania,
I really
as
honest-
opposed to out to sea, way to the south.
I really think the modeling was confused, and the models back then, the stuff they put in nowadays is much more intricate and everything. But I think the LFM was confused. It didn't know
or the NGM.
the NGM. I'm sorry, it was
NGM, yeah.
confused
Yep.
on where these positioning of highs and lows were going to be, and just couldn't get it together.
Yeah.
And you can see what a difference that makes because we didn't have the computing power. And even if we did, this was a sharp cutoff.
Very
between
sharp.
it would be hard today to do it,
Well, we
let
had,
alone back then.
and you have all these models today. You have all these scenarios. You have all these ensembles. I mean, one model could have 32 ensemble runs where they run the model differently with different initializations to give you different scenarios. So when you do that nowadays, you can get a better compromise to all the modeling and get the better, prediction.
Yep.
Back then, you were
didn't have-
limited. You were
yeah,
limited
very
on what
limited.
you can use. And so you went with one solution. It could be no snow or a lot of snow. That's the way it was sometimes.
So it was on our part, and AccuWeather's part. It was you could say it was a risky move because we really put
'Cause we were
most of
putting
our
big
most or all of our
numbers
all of our eggs in that European basket and that northern solution and the blizzard solution. And so while 3-4 days out, the National Weather Service, other competitors, they had for Philadelphia, New York City, la-di-da, fair weather, partly cloudy, not even a hint of snow. 4 days out, we were talking about the potential for a big storm and maybe even blizzard conditions. So
And that is
we were
risky.
out there,
Yeah.
out there kind of all by ourselves, and we were either going to sink or swim, but
Patting Dave's
Yeah,
back right
you
here.
are. He's pretty proud of this one. He's
good.
proud of
That's
this
But
one.
hey,
Yeah,
when you have a
When you-
victory like that, and then lo and
Yep.
behold, 2 days later, then now the National Weather Service, they start to catch up. They have snow in there, but even then, even like 2 days out, they were still somewhat behind the curve, and we just
They
never stopped. I mean, we pretty much had that same idea right from the
Commit.
get-go.
Commit.
Right.
If you're going to do it, commit.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
right.
It's like
Yeah.
hitting a home run. I mean, heck, you do a little cheer around the bases. It's the same
Yep.
thing.
And when we get events like that and we do so well and we have a big victory, we turn that into a nice poster and highlight our victories
Well,
like
plus
that
you had a
because
little bit of sacrifice in there, Dave, because a little bit before we came on the podcast, he was telling us about the story of did you guys both have to stay overnight at AccuWeather, or what happened?
at that time I lived from the old AccuWeather building probably
Which was much smaller.
12, 13 miles away or whatever. In hindsight, I had a four-wheel drive truck. I probably could have braved it and made it. I was working that Sunday afternoon, evening. It was right in the heart of the storm. But I kind of already made a choice that I was going to stay in town because AccuWeather was offering anybody working that day, if they wanted to. They had a hotel or motel several blocks away from the old AccuWeather building.
Walking distance.
So walking distance. So I decided to stay overnight. And here and it was late. It was after midnight. It was a long day. I probably worked a 12-hour day that day.
Yeah.
And walking over to the motel in the snow, in the wind and everything. So I check in and, okay, I'm from AccuWeather. Here's your room. Here's your key. I get to my motel room, and it's like 28 degrees in there. I can see my breath. What's going on? I go over to the window, and the window is open like an inch and a half.
Oh my
Not just a crack, but and snow was blowing in my room. So
oh
I had to
my
shut
gosh.
the window, crank up the heat, and it took probably like half of the night to get the temperature up to like 60, some bearable. So I'm like huddling in, with my coat on, trying to sleep in this room.
Oh my God.
I made it though. I survived, and I was right there, and I only had to walk a few blocks into work the next day. But that was my blizzard of '96 experience.
Wow.
Staying overnight in State College at the AccuWeather Motel.
Well, top that.
Well,
Paul, no, I'm teasing.
we had the trailers there.
Yes, I think we
In
did.
Okay. I get confused a little bit between the 93 storm, the March 93, and the 96. But I believe this is the storm where I stayed 26 hours in a row working. 26 hours.
Also, he did
'Cause-
beat your story because you were sleeping in a
I
hotel
was
that was
sleeping,
freezing,
and,
but he was still.
and he was still
But
there.
I did go over there, but I went over there briefly and I came back. I was 26 hours because people couldn't get in. So I had to stay for their shift. And I was only in the company for a couple of years then. I started in 92. So, I did my job. I stayed there. I picked up for other people that had families, and I stayed in and did my job, and it
Well,
was
you
fun.
pay.
It was
It's the early
experience.
years. It's the early years in the business where you're paying your dues, and you're
Absolutely.
just kind of like, you just work so many
Am I?
long hours.
I still pay my dues now. Different way.
Your dues look a little different now. Probably.
But the whole thing was it was fun. We made it fun. It was
Yeah.
hard work, but we made it fun. We had to. We would have been crazy if we didn't. But we had some good people there, and we got the job done on again the limited stuff back then, which was, for us at that point was, we had enough information to do what we had to do, the skill set. But it would have been nice to have a Doppler radar. But
And being being weather weenies like Paul and I, you live for days like that. That's what you just get all fired up and you live on adrenaline. You
Right,
just operate on
exactly.
adrenaline. You're tired, but so what? You just keep going.
And we will keep going, but first we're going to take a little break in our discussion here because, Ken, we want to tell folks to subscribe or where to find us.
Absolutely. If you like what you're hearing, you can check out all of our other episodes of Everything Under the Sun podcast. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you get to listen to your favorite podcast.
Right, and we want them to subscribe.
That's right. Click that subscribe button. And, of course, you can go back and listen to some of our other past shows, just like the one we put out last week, our yearly wrap-up. Reed Timmer breaking down his top 5 storm chases of the year. It's a good show.
Right, so subscribe. You'll get alerts. You'll know when the next episode drops. Now back to our discussion with Dave. Okay, Dave, so now let's get back to actually breaking down the storm and why this ended up being such a mess, really.
Right, because we had the blizzard of 96 earlier in the month of January 1996. We had a couple of at least one other significant snow event after that, and it was cold, and so we had a lot of snow on the ground
Right.
in the Northeast, and Pennsylvania in particular. We probably had 2 to 4 feet of snow on the ground across the
Wow.
state of Pennsylvania.
So when you're talking about liquid equivalent,
Even if it's a 10-to-1 ratio, I mean, just do the math on that. Even if it's 2 feet of snow and you do the math on a 10-to-1 ratio, that's over 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches of water locked up in that snowpack. So then we have a frozen ground. We had a lot of snow on the ground. And here at AccuWeather, we were looking at this pattern setting up during that third week, basically. But heading into that week, we saw a big warm-up coming, a day-by-day progression in the temperatures trending upward. And at the end of that week, on the maybe the 4th or 5th day of that stretch of the warm-up, we had a big rainstorm. All the computer models are really on board and very good agreement that there was going to be a very juicy, wet system coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico into this mild air mass. It was going to dump 2 to 5 inches of rain across
wow,
the
what did
state.
you think when you saw that? Just
Flood. I mean,
yeah, because that's very concerning.
yeah, and we know that was one of those again, it was like a no-brainer situation. It's like it was right in front of our eyes. It's like we've really got to take this seriously, and we got to start sending out the alert signals right away. Let's tell people that this is a serious situation that could be developing here later this week, given the frozen ground, given all the snow that's going to melt, and we have this rain on top of that. So 5 days out, AccuWeather, we pulled the trigger on the word flooding, and we started talking about the flooding potential. At the same time, a lot of our competition, they were talking about the chance of rain and kind of la-di-da
Right.
forecasts like that. The day before, it became so apparent, this is okay, this is going to
This
happen.
could be catastrophic flooding
Historic,
for some. Yes.
whatever words you want to use to describe it. And so we really pulled out the stops in our wording of our forecasts the day before. This says this is going to be serious, maybe life-threatening flooding. It's going to close roads and so on and so forth. So we really pulled out the stops big time the day before. I tell you, Regina, I've never in my lifetime, I've never seen that much snow on the ground melt that quickly. Literally,
Wow.
there were a couple of feet of snow on the ground. It was on a Thursday evening, and by Friday morning, the snow was gone.
Wow.
I mean, literally
what kind of temperatures
overnight.
were we? Because it was a warm wind out
It was a
ahead of
warm
that.
wind out
I
of the south,
remember.
and the dew points were really high. It was actually for, winter standards, it was humid. I mean, even for April standards or May, it would have been considered humid. I think we had dew points in the upper 50s.
We probably had some pretty dense snow fog too.
Yes, we did for a time. Although there was enough wind to keep things stirred up and so forth, that you didn't have that much of a problem. But we had temperatures that got up near 60, maybe low 60s, upper 50s, give or take. And we have really high dew points. And then we had all this rain that fell.
Right.
Like I said, at least 2 inches in a lot of places. Some places got 3-4 inches, 4 to 5. And the ground was frozen, and so all that water had no place to go. It had no choice but to just run off. And so we had some of the worst flooding. You can compare that to the 72 Agnes flood and some of the other ones we had in the 2000s, but it ranks right up there. I mean, it's in the top probably 3 or 4 as far as the worst flooding ever in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, there was the significant river flooding, but there was also a problem with the ice jams as
Yes.
well, because not only because you have significant river flooding from heavy rainfall,
Right.
but with the ice jams, on top of the fact that it was all runoff,
Right.
that created some significant problems as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then and I remember storm drains all being plugged with snow.
With snow,
Because
right.
they had plowed over storm drains, so there was nowhere for that to go. But after the storm was crazy too, because we went in such extremes.
Yes.
So what happened right after this heavy rainfall?
Right after, and that Friday, you could probably, I know some of the stories on my part. I remember my kids, my older daughter was in school at that time. She was probably in, I don't know, I'd have to think back, maybe first, second grade, something like that. But, all the area schools were closed. There were roads closed around the area. It was a real disaster from a flooding standpoint. And then the very next day, following this storm, this big warm-up and the big rainstorm, then the very next day, this cold air mass, much colder air mass, comes right back in, didn't waste any time, and so we have all this water just standing around, going nowhere, and it's freezing up into this ice, this
So
blocks
as
of ice
that
everywhere.
low left, it dragged that colder air.
Drag the
down
cold,
from
and this is
Canada.
January. This is not like we're talking
yeah.
like not springtime, not fall. This is the dead of winter, right? January 19th, 20th. So that cold air didn't waste any time. It came right back in, and you had all this water laying around, and it just froze up, and it was just a mess.
Well, I'll tell you what I remember about it, because my brother-in-law's house, they're near a river that has only flooded on a couple of occasions, but it flooded, and then it froze, and they never had to mark the side of the house as to where the flooding line was, because the ice hung there for a couple days, so you could see where your water line was on all the houses in the area, because
Right.
it was frozen
Yeah.
in place
Yep.
as it started to break loose. So really interesting story. Thanks for breaking it down for me, Dave.
You bet.
Well, we appreciate our guests, Paul Pastelok and Dave Dombek. And, coming up, we have some really good episodes if you're interested in the 96 blizzard. We've got another episode like that coming up, right, Andy?
Yeah, around March, we're going to be talking with some people that were here at AccuWeather during the blizzard of 1993. So make sure to stay tuned for that.
I wasn't even born yet.
You were. You were like 40 when that storm happened. No, I am kidding. I am kidding. Yeah. So anyway, we have that. We also are going to be talking about weather and your mental health and physical health, and we are going to look into some forensic studies of some winter weather and some lawsuits.
Andy's very excited about the forensics episode coming up.
He is.
You might learn something about icicles falling off and hurting yourself.
been
and
talking-
then who's going to be making jokes?
He's
Not me.
He's been talking for weeks about icicles
I think
falling
he brought
and
this
killing
up in
people.
August.
He did. So we will be talking about that. Stay with us for all these great episodes. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to AccuWeather's Everything Under the Sun, giving you the stories behind the weather and so much more. New episodes every Thursday. Just search for AccuWeather on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or visit AccuWeather.com/podcast.